The early morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the busy road that cut through the heart of the town. Cars zipped by in endless streams there, drivers oblivious to the small, heartbreaking scene unfolding on the side of the road. Amid the noise and chaos, a scrawny, trembling dog stood guard near the curb. Her ribs showed through her thin coat, and her eyes were filled with both fear and determination. Nestled behind her under the fragile shelter of her body were three tiny puppies huddled together for warmth and safety. The dog's ears flicked back and forth, alert to every honk and roar of an engine. She nudged her pups closer to the bushes, her gaze darting between the traffic and the little ones. She was so fiercely protecting. Hunger knotted her and exhaustion weighed her down, but she refused to leave their side. Every instinct in her told her she had to keep them safe no matter the cost. Yet, with cars rushing past at breakneck speeds, her fight felt like a losing battle. Then, just as a particularly loud truck sped by, one of the puppies let out a weak yelp and began to crawl toward the edge of the road. The mother barked sharply, scrambling to block her pup from danger. Her actions caught the attention of a driver in a nearby car who slowed down, squinting to see what was happening. What was this dog doing? The driver, a man in his mid-30s, pulled his car to the side of the road, carefully stepping out to get a closer look. He watched as the dog growled softly, her eyes never leaving him as she shielded her pups. It was clear she was both terrified and desperate. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if approaching would scare her away or make things worse. What would he do next? Would he walk away assuming someone else might help, or would he take a chance despite the risk of getting bitten to save a family that couldn't save themselves? What happened next is something no one could have predicted, a moment of humanity that would leave everyone who heard the story utterly speechless. The man stood by his car, the hum of passing traffic swirling around him as he tried to decide his next move. He wasn't an animal expert, just a regular guy on his way to work. Yet something about the dog's desperate eyes tugged at him. He crouched down a few feet away, making himself look smaller, and spoke softly, though he knew she wouldn't understand his words. "It's okay, girl," he said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the road. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog didn't move, her stance rigid and protective. She let out a low growl, a warning to stay back, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She was torn, her instinct to protect clashing with the possibility that this stranger might be her only chance. The man noticed the puppies tucked behind her, their tiny bodies trembling as they clung to their mother. They looked no older than a few weeks, their formatted, and then the sight made his chest tighten. He glanced around, searching for anyone else who might step in, but no one seemed to notice or care. Cars sped by, drivers honking impatiently, focused only on getting to their destinations. He thought about leaving. It would be easy to get back in his car, drive off, and forget he ever saw them. But as he looked at the mother dog again, standing firm despite her fear, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Still crouching, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the remains of a sandwich he'd packed for lunch. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Slowly, he tore off a piece of bread and placed it on the ground, sliding it toward her. She stiffened, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. Hunger won out, and after a long pause, she inched forward, never taking her eyes off him. She grabbed the bread in her mouth, retreating quickly to her pups, who eagerly sniffed at it. She broke it apart, letting them eat first. Even though her own body was trembling from starvation, the man stayed where he was, watching as the little family devoured the small offering. He could see the mother's ribs more clearly now, her frailty heartbreaking. He couldn't imagine how long she'd been out here scavenging for scraps while trying to keep her baby safe. He wondered if she'd been abandoned left to fend for herself, or if she had once had a home, his thoughts were interrupted by a screech of brakes as a car swerved to avoid a piece of debris. In the road, the sudden noise startled the dog, and she barked sharply. Her puppies huddling closer to her. The man knew time was running out. This wasn't a safe place for them. They needed shelter, food, and care, things he couldn't provide. Standing on the side of a busy road, but how could he get close enough to help without scaring her away? Attention hung in the air, every second feeling like a fragile thread about to snap. The man stood frozen, weighing his options. He knew he couldn't just leave them there, but the more he considered moving closer, the more he realized the risk. Every instinct told him to act quickly, help them. But what if it went wrong? What if the dog, overwhelmed with fear, became aggressive? He could end up bitten, and the situation would spiral into something he couldn't control, yet something in him pushed him to stay, to try. He looked around. Again, there were no other cars pulling over, no one stopping to help. The few pedestrians walking by didn't even glance in the direction of the dog and her pups, too caught up in their own routines. It made him wonder if anyone would stop, even if they saw it all unfold. Would they too just keep moving, pretending they didn't see the small family stranded in the middle of this busy road? The mother dog, still nibbling at the bread, was now looking more agitated. She kept glancing toward the road, ears perked as if sensing the danger around her. Every time a car zoomed past, she would stiffen and step in front of her pups, blocking them from the potential threat. The man's heart ached at the sight. She wasn't just hungry, she was terrified, and yet she kept fighting for her babies. With a sigh, he stepped forward slowly, trying to make his movements as non-threatening as possible. His eyes never left the dog's face, watching for any signs that she might snap. She didn't move, but there was a flash of doubt in her eyes. She was still watching him, waiting for him to make a wrong move. A loud honk broke the silence, making both the man and the dog jump. A car sped by, its driver oblivious to the scene unfolding just a few feet away. The dog growled a warning sound low in her throat, and then unexpectedly she moved toward the road, her attention locked on a larger truck approaching. The man's heart raced. Was she planning to charge at it? He took a step forward, his feet crunching against the gravel. That's when he heard it, an unmistakable bark, loud and sharp, coming from behind him. One of the puppies had started to cry, a high-pitched whimper of distress, lost between hunger and fear. The mother paused, torn between the sound of the truck and her crying pup. It was a split-second decision, but in that moment she hesitated. His chance, the man took another step forward, closing the distance between him and the dog. He could see the weariness in her eyes, the exhaustion from hours or maybe even days of defending her puppies against the dangers of the road. As he reached out with his hand, she looked up at him, and for a moment their gazes locked. It was as if she understood the man wasn't a threat, but the Antion still held in the air, thick, impalpable. There were too many variables, too many unknowns. The puppies were still too small to fend for themselves, and the road was a constant threat behind him. A car screeched to a halt. The man didn't have to look to know what had happened. Someone else had seen the dog, maybe even with the same intent to help, but it was too late to know if they would be an ally or just another bystander. In the growing chaos, the man's heart was pounding now. He had only moments before it could all go terribly wrong. The car behind him honked again, and this time the dog reacted. Her body went rigid, eyes wide, tail tucked low, as if she were about to bolt. The puppies, too, had stopped eating and huddled closer to her, sensing the tension in the air. The man's breath caught in his throat. His fingers hovered just inches from the dog, but he didn't dare move any closer. The slightest wrong move could send her into a frenzy. He could feel the weight of the moment, the crushing pressure of having to make a Choice that could either save them or make everything spiral out of control. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing that the car that had stopped had a driver who was now staring in his direction. Their window rolled down, but they made no move to get out the man's stomach. Churned, were they waiting for him to take the first step, or were they just watching, hoping someone else would intervene? The honking grew louder as another car to avoid something in the road, causing a ripple of panic. The mother dog barked loud and sharp, her instincts taking over. She darted forward, suddenly her body racing toward the traffic. Her movements were quick, too quick for the man to react. Without thinking, he rushed after her. He couldn't let her get hit. He couldn't let the puppies grow up without their mother. As he reached the edge of the road, he saw her moving with alarming speed, trying to block her Pops from a speeding truck barreling toward them. The man's heart skipped a beat. There wasn't time to think. He was already stepping into the street, praying the driver would see him in time. The truck honked loudly, the screech of its brakes cutting through the tension like a knife. The man's pulse raced as he reached out just in time to grab the dog by the collar. She resisted for a split second, but then her body slumped, the weight of everything finally catching up with her. The truck swerved, barely missing them, and the man dragged the dog back toward the curve away from the danger. His legs were shaking as he helped the dog to the safety of the grass. The truck driver didn't stop. He never even slowed down, but that didn't matter. What mattered now was getting the puppies off the road and away from this chaos. The man turned, but his gaze fell on something that stopped him cold. The puppies had scattered in the chaos, in the panic. They had crawled out from their mother's protection, and now they were too far from her, moving dangerously toward the edge of the road. The man's heart hammered in his chest. Every second counted. He turned to the mother dog, his eyes pleading. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She watched him, her eyes filled with trust and fear. The man took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. With his heart racing, he ran toward the puppies, desperately trying to corral them before another car came barreling down the road. Each step felt like it took forever, and his mind was screaming at him to move faster to save them all. But the puppies were small, frantic, and every time he reached one, another would dart further. His feet slipped on the gravel, his hands shaky from the fear that was threatening to paralyze him. He could hear the sound of an approaching vehicle growing louder. Would he make it in time? Would he save them? Or was it already too late? The moment hung in the air, thick with uncertainty and danger, just as the man launched forward, reaching for one of the puppies. A sudden sharp screech echoed behind him. His head snapped around a car. Its engine roaring came barreling down the road faster than he had anticipated. It wasn't slowing. The man froze, panic rising in his chest. The driver wasn't stopping, wasn't even swerving, just heading straight for him. And the puppies, his heart dropped. The truck had been a near miss, but this was different. This car wasn't stopping for anyone. Without thinking, he shouted, "Move." Move to the puppies, hoping they would hear him, hoping they could understand his urgency. But the small creatures, too frightened to comprehend, continued to scurry aimlessly. They had no idea what was coming. The man felt the rush of fear in his veins. He had just enough time to grab one of the puppies by the scruff of its neck, pulling it out of the way of the approaching car. But as he did, another puppy darted further into the path of the speeding vehicle. His breath hitched, his mind raced. He was too far from the others, and the car was closing in. For a split second, it felt like time had slowed down. He could see the headlights glaring toward him, hear the screech of the tires as the driver stomped on the brakes. But the man wasn't sure he would be fast enough. He was holding one puppy, but the others were still at risk. His body screamed at him to run, to pull them all to safety, but there was no way to save them all if he didn't act now. And that Frozen moment of chaos. Something unexpected happened. The mother, with all the remaining strength she had, left shot out from the curb. She ran with a burst of speed that defied her frailty, barking furiously as she collided with the puppy who had run into the road. The puppy yelled in terror, but the dog's body shielded it, knocking it back onto the grass just inches from the speeding car. The car screeched to a halt so close to the dog's body it was a miracle the driver had seen them in time. The man stood there frozen with the remaining puppy in his hands, his heart racing. The mother dog, her body trembling, her fern now stained with dirt and sweat, slowly crawled back to her puppies. Her miss clear she had risked everything, her life flashing before her eyes to save them. But the danger wasn't over. The driver, who had almost hit them, didn't slow down to check. In fact, he sped off, his car zooming past without a second glance, and in the distance the faint sound of another vehicle approaching reached the man's ears. This wasn't just about saving the puppies anymore. This was about getting them all off the road, away from danger and out of a world that seemed too dangerous for a dog and her pups to survive. And the man's grip tightened on the puppy in his arms, his mind now flooded with an overwhelming sense of urgency. If they didn't move, if they didn't find shelter, the worst could happen. His gaze shifted toward the mother dog, her eyes tired but determined. She wasn't giving up, neither could he. But time was running out. Would anyone else step in, or would it be up to him alone to get them to safety? The stakes had never been higher, and the road ahead had never seemed more uncertain. The man's heart pounded in his chest as he scooped up the last puppy, holding it close to his body. The mother, still shaken but resolute, barked softly and nudged the others forward, urging them to follow her to safety. There wasn't a second to lose. The cars continued to rush past them, but he could no longer wait for someone else to act. He had to do it. He had to get them off the road, with the puppies cradled in his arms and the mother dog trailing closely behind. He sprinted toward the nearest underpass, a small overgrown patch of grass on the side. He knew it wasn't perfect, but it was the only shelter nearby, a place where they could rest and hopefully be safe. The mother dog stayed close, never straying far, her watchful eyes never leaving her puppies as she trotted beside him. As he reached the edge of the underpass, he heard the sound of another car approaching. His breath caught in his throat, his instincts screaming to hurry, but he was too exhausted to move faster. He glanced over his shoulder, hoping they wouldn't be caught in the open again. The car slowed down as it approached, and this time it wasn't a speeding threat. The car pulled up to the curb and stopped, its engine humming as the window rolled down. The man turned tense and ready for anything. Was this another careless driver, or was this someone finally willing to help? A voice called out to him, "Hey, is everything okay? Do you need help?" The man squinted, seeing a woman in the driver's seat, her face filled with concern. He almost couldn't believe it. Someone had actually stopped. He ran over to the car, the puppy still squirming in his arms. "Can you help me? These puppies are in danger, and I need to get them somewhere safe," he said, his voice shaking without hesitation. The woman unlocked her car door, her face softening with empathy. "Get and I've got some blankets and space in the back. Let's get them off the street." The man didn't need any more convincing. He carefully placed the puppies into the back seat of her car, one by one, and the mother dog followed them in, sitting quietly as though she knew her pups were finally safe. The woman started the engine, and they slowly drove away from the busy road toward a nearby shelter for animals she was familiar with. As the car turned the corner, the man let out a deep sigh of relief. It was over. They were off the road. He watched as the puppies nuzzled into the blankets, their little bodies finally finding comfort. The mother dog, her eyes still filled with exhaustion, but now with a hint of peace, curled up beside them. But just as the car picked up speed, the man's phone buzzed in his pocket, he pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. Hey, I saw you helping those dogs. You might want to be careful. There's something off about that family. The message was followed by a picture of the mother dog from earlier, the one the man had just helped, standing at the edge of a dark alley, her eyes wide with a fearful expression. The photo had been taken hours ago. His fingers froze on the screen. What did that mean? Was there something more to this dog than he had realized? Something he hadn't been told? As the mystery deepened, the tension he thought he had left behind began to creep back into his mind. The man stared at the message, his thoughts racing. What was it trying to say? Had he done the right thing? He glanced at the peaceful faces of the puppies, their tiny bodies now curled up comfortably in the back seat. The mother dog had laid her head down beside them, her once panicked eyes now filled with contentment as she rested. Still, the words in the message nodded him there was something off about that family. What could that mean? He quickly decided that he wouldn't let the message taint the peace he'd finally found. The dogs were safe. He had helped them for the first time in hours. He felt a weight lift off his chest. He looked out of the window as the car cruised toward the animal shelter. The world around them seemingly oblivious to the struggle they had just endured. When they reached the shelter, the woman who had helped him drove straight to the entrance where a group of volunteers were waiting to take in the dogs. As a man stepped out of the car, one of the volunteers came over with a warm smile, offering a hand. You did the right thing today, she said. It's not easy to step in when no one else does. These dogs are lucky you were there. The man felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was true, he had taken a risk, faced a danger that he didn't fully understand, but in the end he had helped save lives. The puppies would be cared for, and the mother would get the medical attention she needed to fear the chaos, the close calls. It was all over. The dogs were safe, but as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. The volunteer was holding the phone, looking at it with a puzzled expression. This is odd, she murmured, showing him the screen. It was a photo of the same dog, the one he had just helped, but this time the background looked familiar. The same alley he had seen in the image earlier. The volunteer raised an eyebrow. It's strange, these dogs were reported a few days ago. Someone had claimed to have seen them near this exact alley, but no one knew where they came from. The man's stomach tightened. That alley he had seen, that place in the photo too, but the mystery didn't end there. The volunteer added, and these dogs, they're not just strays. There's something more to their story. They've been rescued from a known hoarder's house. The man felt his pulse quicken again. Was the mother dog part of a larger story, something he didn't fully grasp? But for now he knew one thing: the puppies were safe and the mother had given everything to protect them. The rest of the details didn't matter right now. As he turned to walk away, the last thing he saw was the mother dog, her eyes following him one last time before she settled with her pups in the care of the shelter. A part of him wanted to stay to ensure they were okay, but he knew that his journey with them was over. Sometimes, even when you don't have all the answers, the right thing to do is simply to step up when needed, to act when others won't. The dogs were safe, the mystery unresolved, but in the end that was enough. Walking back to his car, he felt a sense of closure, a quiet satisfaction. He might never know the full story, but he had done what mattered most, and as he drove away, he couldn't help but reflect on how sometimes life places challenges in our path that are beyond our understanding, but in those moments we find out just how much strength we really have.